Hey gang. Um, so this notes video is going to be covering new military technology during World War I, as well as trench warfare, which is kind of a response to the new military technology that's being introduced during this time period. So poison gas is our first new military technology being used. It is used to blind, choke, and burn victims, your enemies on the opposite side. So this killed and injured thousands of people during World War One. However, you could only use it in a limited fashion because you had to be super careful of the winds and which way it was blowing. Winds could blow gas back on the army, and gas masks were developed to protect soldiers from poison gas, but they didn't always do as good a job as they could. So poison gas is the first one. Rapid fire machine guns is another thing that's developed during this time. And machine guns kind of make war a little bit impersonal, and also kill people in a very great percentage during World War One. So there's a very high casualty count during this war, mostly due to machine guns. And then we also have high explosive shells, bombs, and a lot of the time what the armies would do is drop them from airplanes onto their opponents because we were using trenches during World War One, so it was hard to attack your enemy when they're in a hole underground. Yep. Continuing with military technology. So we also have tanks being developed during World War I, and this is really a response to the use of trenches. Because they are armored vehicles, machine guns can't do a lot against them, so they would be used to drive across and attack trenches. They were first created and used by the British, and they could travel across rough terrain. They were mostly used later on in the war. That's when they were developed. So in the beginning of the war, there wasn't a lot of tanks rolling around. And then airplanes are another big one that are used during World War One. So initially, they were being used to gather intelligence on the opposing side, on your enemy. But later on, they began attaching machine guns to them to attack people in trenches and also dropping bombs out of them, like I said in the previous slide. So trench warfare, like I mentioned, is a big part of World War One. So trenches were not a new concept to war. They had been used in previous wars, like we used them in the American Revolution. But World War I kind of introduces them on a whole new scale. So all of the trenches combined being dug during this war cover about 25,000 miles. So that's a lot of trench to dig. 12,000 of those miles was controlled by the Allies, and that would be the side that we would join when we reached the war. Soldiers lived in these trenches in miserable conditions. There was a disease called trench foot that you could get because the trenches would fill with water, and then you would just be standing in water the whole time. It's pretty gross. I was gonna put some pictures of trench foot on here, but it's nasty. So if you like that kind of thing, go look up what trench foot looks like. Storming the trenches was a thing that happened during World War One. So imagine you're on one side in a trench and the people opposing you are ordered out of the trenches and ordered to come attack you. Usually what would happen is a lot of those people would die coming to attack you because you had machine guns and you could just mow them down before they got to you. So storming the trenches, not a very effective method of attack, but it got to be so like it was kind of just a waiting game with trench warfare because you couldn't really do much until the other side did come out of the trenches. So thousands died on both sides because people would be ordered over the top of the trenches into no man's land, which is what they would call the areas between the trenches. And then the bodies were mostly never recovered because you didn't want to enter no man's land again once the other side had mowed everyone down. So then I just have some pictures of some trenches. So this is some German trenches. As you can see, they're all just like sitting in a hole that they dug. Not very well dug either. These sides are really rough. And then here are some other pictures of some trenches. As you can see in this picture, they're very crowded together, very close quarters in trenches. Lots of disease would spread in the trenches because they were so close together. And then as you can see, the water here is pretty nasty in this trench. So this guy is probably going to develop some trench foot at some point. So trenches were super important during World War I because of all the new military technology that was being created. They kind of helped to protect the soldiers from gas and machine guns because they could duck down, avoid the gas a little bit. And they could avoid machine gun fire as long as they were in the trenches. And then tanks, like I said, were created in response to trench warfare. Because they were hard to penetrate with machine guns, they could roll across no man's land and kind of attack the trenches in that way. So that's it for new military technology and trenches. Please join me next time when we will actually enter the war. Shocking.